Welcome to the German Council of Foreign Relations. My name is Thomas Kleine-Brockhoff. Oops, have to get this out of the way here. Director here at the Council. We're talking about connected vehicles this afternoon. And one might ask, what's the foreign policy think tank got to do with connected vehicles? Talking about cars in a place like this, why? So the answer is because cars are no longer just cars. We now call connected vehicles computers on wheels. Connected systems are vulnerable, and so are cars. Vulnerable to espionage, to surveillance. Good afternoon, come on in. To sabotage. Vehicles collect vast amount of data, and data in the wrong hands, we know that is an issue and a problem. And they can compromise individual users and disrupt critical infrastructure at the same time. The automotive sector, of course, everybody knows for this country is central. For several other countries in Europe, it's also extremely important. And so the question at hand here is not simply an economic question. It is a political, it's a foreign policy, and it's a strategic question. That's why we have the answer to the question, what does an event about cars have to do with a foreign policy think tank, pretty much at hand. So I want to thank you all for coming, and you will have an afternoon led by my colleague Valentin Weber, to which I will hand over in 1 second, and a day of talks tomorrow. So with that, over to Valentin. Thank you for coming.
Welcome everyone to DGAP. This afternoon, as Thomas Kleine-Brockhoff just mentioned, we will speak about cybersecurity. And so it's also fitting that we sit in the Robert Bosch Saal, which is named after Robert Bosch, who founded one of the global automotive suppliers company. And in this vein, it's a fitting room. I'm Valentin Weber. I'm a senior research fellow here at the DGAP. I'm leading the Cyber Norms Project, which is generously funded by the German Federal Foreign Office, the cyber coordination staff there. Before we start, a few organizational remarks. I'm first of all very grateful to my colleagues Maria Perikas and Michael Lacher, and also Lily Tran for having co-organized this event, as well as to the technician who is supporting us today. This event is being recorded at the moment, so it's great to see everyone online as well to have joined us. We'll have potentially 10 minutes at the end for Q&A, but we'll prioritize really questions in the room for people who will ask them. Today's cars, as we've heard, they don't only collect data about themselves, but they also collect data about other vehicles, about pedestrians. They even see if there's people around the corner who might be engaged in a confrontation with a car. They're communicating with critical infrastructure, with the transport infrastructure, and as many other critical technologies as well, such as 5G. Regarding connected vehicles, one needs to trust the vendor and the manufacturer that the equipment will not be subverted by cyber criminals or also by foreign states, that there won't be any backdoors in those systems. There could be really devastating effects if that happened. For instance, a few vehicles could block major roads in Paris, Berlin, or London, and that could mean that there is transport comes to a halt in that city. So cybersecurity is really crucial. Last year, in 2024, there were 75% of all cars had embedded cellular connectivity of all cars sold last year, 75%. Imagine that. That's a quite big number. And most of them were connecting to other infrastructure via 4G. So in short, we're not speaking about the future. The future is already here when we talk about connected vehicles, and we need to get on top of the issue right now. But enough from me. I'm very excited that we have a fantastic panel today to discuss this timely topic. And I would invite our three speakers today to join me on the panel on stage right now. With us today is at the right of us, Maria Adebahr. She's the Director for Cyber Foreign and Security Policy at the German Federal Foreign Office. And she has joined the Federal Foreign Office in 2006 and has held various diplomatic posts, including in Tehran, Washington, D.C., and other locations. In March 2018, she was appointed spokesperson of the Federal Foreign Office. To my knowledge, she was the first woman to be holding that office. And since then, she has also served as a deputy ambassador and head of the economic department of the embassy in Rome. She studied law and modern history in France, Germany, and the US. Then right next to me here, we have Phil Earl, who is the Deputy Director for International Vehicle Standards in the UK Department for Transport, focusing really on all aspects of road vehicle regulation and compliance. That includes engagement within the World Forum for Harmonization of Vehicle Regulation in the UNECE and the UK's Vehicle Type Approval Framework. Importantly, in last year, Phil set up the UK's Connected Vehicles Unit to focus specifically on the opportunities, but also cybersecurity threats emanating from the Internet of Things. And he also was very central in the UK's first national data strategy. In the middle, we have Romain Pessia, who is, I hope I pronounced that correctly, who is the Deputy Head of Vehicle Regulations and Homologation at the French Ministry of Transport, where he also manages the public policy and regulations related to the safety, security, and emissions of motor vehicles. He represents France in international and European expert groups on vehicle safety and regulations, with a particular focus on, very relevant for today, intelligent and connected vehicles. He did previously work at the French Ministry for Ecological Transition and Territorial Cohesion and the National Vehicle Type Approval Authority. Lots of accomplished experts or practitioners at this panel, and I would like to go straight into the topic without any further ado. And I would like to start with Ambassador Adebahr. A question for you would be, how are the cybersecurity risks of connected vehicles currently handled in Germany? Are there any specific cybersecurity provisions for vehicles and components sourced from or produced by untrusted vendors? What is the current landscape of the cybersecurity landscape regarding connected vehicles? Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for the invitation and the interest in this very hot and new, but very timely foreign policy and foreign security policy topic, as Thomas Kleine-Brockhoff just explained. In preparation to this meeting, my team and I, Norman and I, we looked up what is there in terms of regulation for connected vehicles. What is there in terms of technical standard? From which point of view do we as German government come across this issue? What we have here in Germany is an interministerial commission founded last August, I think, September, to deal with that matter. Why did the former German government do this? We did it because, we just thought it's a foreign policy and it's a security policy issue. We have to have standards. We have to have an economic policy towards that. In Brussels, people are thinking about those things. And in the United States, we had meetings and an intense dialogue with the then US administration on how to go about, or how would the US go about regulations for automated driving vehicles. And of course, this is no news to us. German car industry is big in business and also invested in the US market. So it was also driven by our Ministry of Economic Affairs and our then Ministry of Transport and Infrastructure. What you have here in Germany now is a change in the setup of the government. I don't know whether you know that we will have for the first time a Ministry of Digital Affairs. Parts of various ministries will move there, especially those parts dealing with state modernization and digital infrastructure of German entities, critical entities, bottom-down focus, and whether and how this interministerial commission will be led out of the Ministry of Digital Affairs or still the Ministry of Economics is not yet clear, I think. So we have a little bit of a pause. I hope this doesn't take long to resume our work in this ministry, in this commission. We just had a first meeting under the new government, so there is no pause as such, but we have to settle procedures here in Germany. What we have in Germany in terms of rules is dating 2017 and 2020, an act on automated driving. This is a law that amends the Road Traffic Act, so the Straßenverkehrsgesetz for those who speak German. And this is a point where, and then I stop and I would be wondering whether you see this phenomenon as well. So what we did so far in Germany in terms of legislation is amending the Road Traffic Act. So we come across connected vehicles from the point of view of security of our streets. If you look at the EU level and legislation and directives and recommendations you have there, I can go into further detail on what the EU is doing in that field. The EU comes close, or takes the subject for the time being as a subject of product safety. So in Germany, I think we watch it under the angle of street safety. In the EU, it's product safety. In the US, it's also economic interests and also product safety. And this angle that we discuss here today, I think, cybersecurity and the connections to other states, the word espionage we just heard in the introduction, is a fairly new angle to this topic and not yet fully reflected in legislation. So I stop here, and I don't know whether you share this observation.
That was a really perfect overview of what is happening in Germany. It is good to hear that it's really an interministerial effort, because we have even on stage now different ministries, which is fantastic. We need to really tackle it from different approaches. We know that some ministries have more of a regulatory standards approach, others have more of a foreign policy. There's the economic aspect, so it's really good to see that this is happening. And also we're looking forward to what will happen in Germany also with the new digital ministry. So we can't forget the EU level as well, which was mentioned. Maybe we can touch on that further. I'd like now to pass to Romain, who also, as Maria just mentioned, regarding the US Department of Commerce regulation, which came into force this does have also impact on other countries, including France. So just to give a short overview of what the US connected vehicle rule is, it means that there can't be any Russian or Chinese components in cars on US roads. That means even if it's German or French or Italian cars, which are being exported to the US, they can't have Chinese or Russian components in them. Question for you, Romain, not a tricky one at all. Well, how does France view that? How is it tackling that, let's say, a bit of a challenging also environment, which is coming internationally upon European countries and European regulators?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question, Valentin. Thank you to the invitation. Good afternoon to all. And as you said, not a tricky question at all. And in the automotive industry, we are talking about an industry that was built on the back of free trade agreements and on technical harmonization. So any measure that goes against that direction is bound to have a global impact, that's for sure. Now, perhaps the easy initial answer would be to say that France might not be as affected by the measure as other countries because we have manufacturers that might not be with as large an overlap with the US market as countries like Germany or Japan. But the truth is, yes, in the United States, in order to succeed in the market, you need to have either products that are aiming for the high-end market where the cost of repair and having perhaps an extensive dealer network would not be as much of a factor in the cost of repair. In terms of French OEMs, the easy answer would be to say that the impact is perhaps not as large. But the truth is, not only does the impact exist because the environment today is not the same as it used to be. As I mentioned earlier, the automotive industry is now a global one. We're not just working with manufacturers, but we are also working with their suppliers. And in France, we have large suppliers that not only have their own tier 2 suppliers that they need to consider if they want to sell their own products on vehicles in the US markets, but also these tier 1 suppliers, for instance, in France, have the Chinese manufacturers that might be affected by these measures in the United States. So in fact, it's an impact that we don't just need to consider on the first step of the measure, which is the manufacturers, but it's also all the way towards the end of the supply chain. So of course, the OEMs have been performing deep analysis of what is the impact of the measure on their own suppliers. And in fact, now doing this kind of measure is coming at a time when partnerships between OEMs and with new actors, we talked about automated vehicles, for instance, and automated vehicles is a time where traditional OEMs are looking to make new partnerships with new actors. In order to do that, you need a more global ecosystem than ever. So such a measure is really bound to have an impact. We also have more and more international projects where, let's say, hardware platforms are used with different levels of technologies for different markets. So all of that really has a broad impact on the market. So the impact indeed is huge. As to how we analyze the rule, we have to take into account that in the US, they don't really have the exact same way of entering the market as in the European Union, for instance. In the EU, we are based on a certification system, which means when any vehicle enters the market, there is some kind of right of looking into the system. There is one European authority that will have a general look at vehicle technology, which is very different from the US ecosystem, where when vehicles are placed into the market, it's a self-certification approach. So when you do that, you don't really have the same ability to look at the vehicle before it's on your market. So it might explain some of the measure that has benefits that goes beyond just looking at the line of the measure itself. So for instance, when suppliers have to provide some information to the authorities there about their supply chain or their bill of material, that is something that in Europe, we don't really have that problem because we have this initial look that is not only by the certifying authority, but by any authority that wants to have a look at it. Now, as whether or not Europe should copy the same approach, I would tend to be very cautious about copying or carrying over any direct measure from the US about targeting a specific geographical zone. By doing this, it would have very broad impacts on the supply chain. I mentioned not only the OEMs directly, but the OEMs with regard to the supplier. It means maybe breaking contracts, having to rearrange the supply chain, and the tier one suppliers having to do that with their own suppliers. And perhaps one parallel with this measure to end my intervention would be with at the time of COVID, when we had the components shortage. And at the same time, we had a very drastic effect on the supply chain. And of course, it was not planned, and there was not a 2-year notice for OEMs and suppliers to do that. But we saw how much the supply chain was tightly constrained, and any element that went to perturb the supply chain meant a very heavy impact, not only on the production itself, of course, but even the certification costs, having same tier spec and just different supplier. All of that goes into an ecosystem that it's really hard to see from an external perspective. So that's why I say we need to be cautious about doing these kinds of measures. The automotive industry is really global, and we have to consider that first in Europe too.
Quick, non-tricky follow-up to you. So I understand it's all complex, and would it make sense? So if I see it correctly regarding you, the current risk assessment is that certification is kind of the standard, which is okay. And would you say, even if geopolitically, things turn out to be a bit more serious and volatile, that this is a sustainable thing to do? And you mentioned also that supply chains are a bit difficult to adjust, but giving a long enough time frame, right? Giving industry and others a heads up, would it make sense to already signal also that if things turn a bit more serious, geopolitically, internationally, that there could be things coming? Or is it just to communicate, okay, this certification scheme approach of Europe will work also in the long term?
Well, I think the certification approach is one that we should keep in any case. Now, of course, it's possible to combine a certification approach with additional measures that are put on top of that. But we have to consider that if we do any kind of blocking based on geographical location of the providers, the industry will probably try and look into the next available solution. So we either have to do a very complicated solution of having really to target what we want based on factors like location, or we could look at what we think is the best solution, which is to look at the end goal, and the end goal is indeed cybersecurity. So the certification approach is good because it goes from the perspective of the result we want to achieve, and the rest of that is how do we achieve this level of security, and then how do we test that, and what kind of protocol do we have to make sure that a given vehicle is safe. Now, perhaps if the geopolitical landscape, as you said, were to change, we might want to adapt our grid and protocol, and to ask, well, perhaps there were factors that we did not consider before when we were mostly focusing on the risk of attack, and perhaps instead we have to look at not only attacks, but also untrustworthiness. And perhaps that's a key to improve our grid of reading vehicle cybersecurity. So I think we're very fond of the certification approach, and other countries have been looking at that for cybersecurity because they see the benefits. So perhaps changing the grid is better than changing the approach.
Thank you so much also for really mastering that follow-up answer. Over to you, Phil. We know that, or I have recently experienced also BYD buses in London when I took my bus to London City Airport. Maybe you as well when you went there. On the website they have the cybersecurity certification as well there, as showing that they do comply with that. At the moment there is 1,800 BYD buses on UK roads. JAC, Chinese brand of cars, sold twice as many cars as Tesla did in the UK last month in the UK. So it's really, the times are changing, I guess. The Chinese market share of EVs in the UK is at the moment around 7% and is projected to make up 25% on the EV market by 2030. So, things are going this direction, but at the same time, the UK is also banning all electric vehicles from certain military installations. So not just, geographically, but all EVs and connected vehicles. So I'll be curious to hear what the reasoning is behind the UK's approach. What is the risk assessment? And do you think it could be also, a risk assessment that could be, adjusted or also taken on in other European countries?
Thanks, Valentin, and hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. So excellent question, and I think that there's a lot to unpack there, and that to some extent, I think, goes to the heart of the cross-government approach that we're taking in the UK, as I think other panelists have alluded to as well. Whilst I sit in our Ministry or Department for Transport, there are many others who have an interest in all of this, and we certainly come at this whole issue around connected vehicles, as you said in your introduction of me at the start, from the perspective that the starting point is that these connected vehicles are associated with enormous amounts of opportunity. It's not just a sort of a toy or something that is being done for the sake of it. There's real benefits that can be derived from these connected vehicles, whether that's for safety, whether that's to support the environment, whether it's about improving the efficiency of the transport system. There are enormous opportunities, potential opportunities here, which the UK government is certainly keen to explore and to unlock. But as with any form of innovation, it's important that in order to almost give yourself permission to be able to seek those opportunities, you need to demonstrate that you're also managing and mitigating the risks of doing so. I mean, you refer to sort of the number of Chinese-made vehicles on the roads. I mean, our general approach around all of this is that we welcome investment from around the world, and agree with Roman in terms of our teams already working closely together in international fora to ensure that we have the right technical regulations around cybersecurity and around data and these sorts of things, which are being kept under constant review. But that's the right way of looking at it. I mean, you referred to the at least some of the public reporting around what the UK Ministry of Defence is doing in terms of its approach. I mean, you may not be surprised to hear it's a bit more nuanced than that. And in preparing for this event, I have been talking to our colleagues from our Ministry of Defence who assure me that there is definitely not a blanket ban on any types of vehicle in military installations, but there are, of course, strict security procedures in place because they are very sensitive sites with sensitive information in them, and therefore it's important to take appropriate measures to ensure that that information is protected. But again, I think that kind of goes to the heart of this debate and what other panelists have alluded to, which is there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to dealing with mitigating the threats and the risks here. It's about taking appropriate measures and understanding what all of those are, understanding the nature of the risks and understanding how we can address those in the right way. I mean, I think like Roman working on sort of technical regulation, there is definitely a role there for addressing the risk. Security by design is quite an important thing in any kind of sector around cybersecurity, and that is definitely a very important element of all this, and ensuring that as far as possible, what we need to do here is about working in partnership. It's not just about government, it's not just about industry, it's about the whole system, I think, working together to understand and to deal with these risks, again, as I say, to try and give ourselves the space and the opportunity to really go after the real benefits that can be derived from these kinds of vehicles.
Thank you very much, and also for providing nuance on what is out there. That helps, I think, everyone. That really very, very much appreciate that. So there are special security measures for special locations, let's say. Do you think those special security measures should be broadened also to general government offices or general ministries beyond the military? That there should be special zones, with which are special. Also with 5G, we had that. We have no, special 5G zones in capitals and so on, where there are certain technological provisions. Another aspect is also procurement, government procurement. Do you think anyone, maybe question to any of you three, is that a viable, possibility forward, that government procurement is another way of very in a targeted way to reduce the risk to national security? And maybe I feel I can see you reaching over, but I think that sounds like a target and something that can be also tackled immediately without having too much, lengthy processes that could be tackled immediately, those risks.
I mean, I'd be interested in hearing from others as well, but I think, as I said, it's really important that we take take actions which are proportionate to and address the risks. So it's really important, I think, to make sure there is a shared understanding of what those risks are, and then take appropriate action. I mean, broadly speaking, government procurement is a useful lever to have in the toolbox of policy making generally. The government often uses its own procurement to lead by example or to set a particular direction. That doesn't necessarily mean it is or isn't the right thing to do here, but I think it's important to kind of have an open mind to all the different tools in the policy making toolbox, and think about all of those in addressing the risks that we identify.
I guess I will follow up and say that I think it is possible to take additional measures for certain use cases. And as much as I said previously that we should not restrict putting vehicles on the market, there are instances where it's possible to take additional measures that are not based on the vehicle being able to be sold, but rather on the use of the vehicle. One very broad measure, for instance, is in France, we have a requirement in the law that says that any manufacturer that has a cyber attack needs to report to the government in case of attack. But we also have additional requirements for vehicles that are based on their use. For instance, we have requirements for vehicles that transport children. So it is possible to say that we put extra requirements for vehicles that have a sensitive use case. So that's part of the toolbox, of course. But again, I think it's important to get the message that any measure we take should be based on the end goal. And Phil, you talked about having a proportional measure, which I think is important. And an example of measure that works is, for instance, EV incentives. In France, it's not based on the exact geographical location, but instead we look at the total carbon footprint. So that way, having an objective goal sets a clear objective, and perhaps having the same approach for cybersecurity. And we could talk about having other optional standards for vehicle cybersecurity that could be used for government procurement. But I think it's important to have the message that should be based on the use and should probably look at the end goal of cybersecurity and be technologically based rather than based on factors that are not necessarily directly related to the security of the vehicle itself. But that's indeed part of the toolbox of things we can consider.
Yeah, I think in Germany, a little bit drawing from the 5G legislation experience, probably we might see, because Germany is in the process of developing its position. Zooming out a little bit, I think what is important is that what I think the German government will maintain in terms of standards or principles is that any rule to this question should be country neutral or country agnostic, should be tech neutral, and will be aiming at securing a secure supply chain. Fourth principle, I think, is reporting and transparency. currently, as France is, as Britain, I don't know, probably, I'm talking NIS2, so the Information Security Directive coming from the EU. NIS2 implementation in European member states is moving forward, but not probably for the time being with the velocity that we wished for. Then know about Great Britain, for example, whether you have any sort of regulation like NIS2. I know you have regulation. I don't know how far you go in terms of implementing the same standards or the same rules. Under NIS2, we will have additional reporting obligations and duties for German companies, generally speaking. So far, under NIS1, 4,500 German companies have to report incidents or safety standards or cybersecurity measures to the German BSI. This is our Federal Agency of Information Security. And we think under NIS2, this number of German companies affected or falling under the realm of NIS2 will raise to more than 20,000, 29,500 is our estimation for the time being. So it raises the duties for German companies by 650%, the obligations and transparency obligations and reporting duties that they will have. This is a general principle, and we are moving in that cybersecurity direction very fast in implementing EU law. And this will affect also supply chains and car manufacturing in a broader sense.
Thank you so much. And I really appreciate it's much more clear than, the policies are evolving, but it seems that there is a vision behind the policy responses, which will drive also the particular regulations and approaches that countries are taking. So even though they are not yet there, I think there is already certain principles that will be put in force. I think it's really interesting that you mentioned also NIS2, because we see how critical infrastructure is also integrated one with another. The different sectors, we think of them separately. We have separate approaches also to the different sectors. But just last week, we saw also the news story about the power inverters and how also there were Chinese components found in those products which were not part of the label. So there was no possibility to mitigate the risk. And those power inverters are also used, for instance, in electric vehicle charging facilities. So here we see also how the energy grid interconnects with electric vehicles. And also, so we see it's all interconnected. And as we saw earlier, the cars are connecting via 4 and 5G. So it's really, we need to have a comprehensive approach. We can't regulate and have different approaches to each critical infrastructure sector. So I think this NIS2 approach, again, of looking at the entire critical infrastructure is very, very good. I would now turn, as we're already at 35 minutes past, I would like to turn to the international dimension. We've talked about the different national approaches, the EU approach, and the European approach. And I would like to now turn really to the international dimension and stay with you, Maria, regarding the international negotiation forums. We know that different forums are intended for different purposes. We know there's standards and all these things. But regarding cybersecurity threats, to the international cybersecurity threats, there's also the example of the United Nations open-ended working groups, which looks at current and emerging threats also. And I haven't seen it yet raised, the automotive issue, but there's already talks about supply chain security. There's talk about emerging technologies, the Internet of Things, and all that seems to me also related to the automotive sector. And I would be curious if you see any role also for the OEWG, also for other fora, such as, the group of 7 or other fora international, which could cover especially the threats part of automotive security.
Very good question. For those who are not familiar with this UN thing, currently we negotiate in New York the first permanent cyber body of the UN ever. So the UN gets awake and is negotiating after government expert groups and an open-ended working group, which hopefully comes to an end in July, a first permanent cyber mechanism. So a lot of struggle there, a lot of different positions, but we stand behind the proposal of France for a program of action, and hopefully we will get there in July. So the setup of this permanent cyber body is not yet clear, but we expect it to have work strands or working groups and established by a General Assembly resolution. And one of those principles guiding, as you mentioned, this cyber mechanism should be, in our view, to uphold international law and uphold international norms that we would consider as applying in cyberspace. We have an international framework of international law already of 11 existing norms. Some states wouldn't say this applies. A vast majority adheres to the principle that those norms apply, like human rights, safe and secure, fair and free, maintain your cybersecurity, hygiene, and so on and so forth. And one of those norms is securing supply chains. And this might be really the angle where automated driving and connected vehicles come in and could play a role. Did we so far talk in the negotiations about that specific topic? Honestly, we didn't. And I was asking myself, why is this so? But I think that this topic is for the middle grounds or least developed states. Majority of UN member states fall in this groups. This very technologically advanced question is not at the forefront of their needs and things that they have to cope with each day. So middle ground states, or let's put it like that, it's a Western question. Yeah, it's a US, it's a European question. It's a question for car manufacturers in Asia for the time being. Rightly so or not is another topic to discuss, but we are the group, even also in the UN, that brings this subject up. And whether we should do this and in which form is really a good question to think about. So I take this with me. Hopefully we'll have the mechanism in July and then getting back to you on proposals on how to introduce this subject there. I want to mention shortly another body which we deem very important, and this is the Economic Commission for Europe, the UNECE in Geneva. You might know the body. Many people do not, but it's established. It's a UN body, but no, it's a privately run body in the end by an association in its structure. But it's considered as a UN standard-setting body or an international standard-setting body. They, for example, I learned about that when visiting the UNECE in Geneva for a couple of weeks ago. They introduced in the 1970s the belt regulation. So you have to put a belt when you sit in a car. And afterwards, this became a worldwide standard. And UNECE still, until today, is working on car regulation and has established, together with the International Trade Telecommunication Union, the ITU, a working group also on automated driving and automated vehicles. This is gaining fast pace and speed, and will be also a location and a meeting point where worldwide and global standards also for our today subject of discussion will be set. I would be interested in your opinion on this. Yes, I leave it there.
Thank you, Romain. Phil, anything on the UNECE that you would like to add very shortly on that issue, if that your thoughts on it?
Well, I'd be more than happy to, and I'm sure Phil would be as well, because UNECE is indeed one of the fora where France, Germany, and the UK can work together on cybersecurity. And in fact, UNECE is very proud to have set what I think we can call the global standard or regulation for cybersecurity with UN regulation number 155. And that, of course, is valid itself in, I think, more than 60 countries now that have signed the 1958 agreement and that apply these United Nations regulations, which, as Maria said, can apply directly in all countries. And those are one of the keys to the harmonization of vehicle characteristics, because you only need to do the testing once and then your vehicle can be sold as is in any of the 60 countries. But there is also another agreement that's called the 1998 agreement, and that one has also been signed by United States, Canada, and Russia, in addition to, for instance, European Union, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa. So this group together of countries that does include European actors, North America and China and Asia have drafted not only United Nations Regulation 155, but also set of harmonized guidelines that can be used in any of those countries. So there has been a strong involvement from around the globe. And I think that is a very strong standard that we definitely want to keep looking at in the future. And it's interesting because when working day to day with that regulation, the daily discussions at the UN, it's usually Germany, the UK, and France that are taking the floor a lot of the time. So I'm sure Phil might want to say more, but it's indeed an extremely important forum for cybersecurity.
Phil, very shortly, or you'll get another question you can pick. Okay, taking the risk. Let's see. Also, yeah, for you, it would be really to also speak to that international dimension. I'll throw in some more facts, some more numbers, basically. You know, if we look at Europe, the market share of Chinese EVs is still quite small. And when we look at the UN ECE, we know that it's mostly about non-state actors, you know, or also state actors, and it's about setting general standards to provide general cybersecurity. Whereas the open-ended working group is really also looking at putting norms around nation states and make sure that they don't attack each other's critical infrastructure, that they secure their own supply chains and so on. So it's really the nation state focus. And just to add to that, and I would be curious, again, going back to that international dimension, looking outside Europe, is that there is a much higher percentage, again, of Chinese electric vehicles. We know in Brazil, it's at 82%. In Israel, it's 64%. And the Chinese global EV market share is 62%. Imagine this. It's a very, very big number. And if we think how that segment is growing, it's becoming really important. So it seems that in Europe and let's say industrial countries such as Japan and South Korea, I think there's very much an awareness. Also, what Maria said earlier, that this is an issue that we need to have secure supply chains, and perhaps in the global majority, many of those countries that I just mentioned, where there is, you know, already a huge market share, it doesn't seem to really be such an awareness of that risk. I'll be curious to know how we should also, you know, are there already discussions? Are those countries very active also, let's say in the UNECE or other fora? Or are they rather not engaging too much in discussions? How would you also gauge the view that, you know, countries outside Europe have on this issue and outside the most, let's say, industrialized countries?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think within the UNECE, I mean, perhaps historically it was seen as perhaps a smaller group of interested countries, but I mean, I've only been operating in this space for rather less than some of the other people who attend the UNECE, and it's their lifetime's work. But I think we're seeing increasing interest from many countries, and not necessarily just the kind of traditional auto-producing countries, but I think a recognition not only the producers of automotives, but also the users and consumers of automotives, that they want to have an influence and a say over the standards that are set for the vehicles that find their way into their markets as well. So yes, I mean, I think I would echo what Roman said around the importance, and I think it goes back to what I said earlier as well around this kind of needing to be a partnership. The other important thing about Working Party 29 at the UNEC is that it's not just a forum for governments to talk to other governments or for regulators to talk to regulators. It's a forum in which you have industry, both in terms of individual companies, but also their representatives, broader stakeholders who are interested in safety and environmental aspects, coming together with governments and the authorities, type approval authorities, to collectively make regulations and rules that ultimately are about supporting growth and innovation in the sector, but also, you know, protecting people, protecting safety, protecting the environment. And I think that's why it is such a positive forum, because it goes to the heart of what standards making should be about. It's about everybody coming together and creating one set of rules that everyone can abide by, that work and actually are designed to sort of tackle the issues that need tackling, rather than sort of everybody taking their own different approaches, which is, much more difficult for manufacturers to meet in a global market, and is a lot less likely probably to actually address the underlying issues.
I just want to add a tiny little thing in terms of participation, global participation, and the higher your vested interests, the higher and more active your participation in various fora is, I think. AI comes on top of all those things that we are discussing this afternoon. And there is the Global Digital Compact adopted by the UN last summer, and we are now in the phase of implementing it. And then you can say, oh, it's the United Nations, it's a little bit lofty, it's in New York, and it's a global dialogue on AI in a scientific board. What should it be? It's about human rights, yeah. But, and we have, all of our countries have to take into account, if we do not discuss AI governance for free and fair and good use of AI, including in vehicle applications. And if we do not discuss this on a global level, our head count says that, have about more than 100 countries not being present at all in an international discussion on AI governance. Because more than 100 countries worldwide are not member of the G7, G20, EU, OECD, UNESCO, what have you, or are not able to participate there very actively. So don't underestimate UN processes. They are slower than other processes. They are not technical standards setting bodies, but they are important to take the whole world on board and discuss this in a security and foreign policy perspective.
Thank you so much. We have 10 more minutes, and I would like to ask one last question, so you can, looking a bit more into the future, and then we'll see if we have a time for Q&A. I would like to go a bit broader and again look into the future at connected vehicles that are coming up. We know that drones are connected vehicles. We know that all domains are becoming a bit more autonomous. We know that there's autonomous ships, NATO ships, which are in the Baltic Sea as well, looking out for cargo ships which might interfere with critical infrastructure. So we see that there is cars, there's drones, there's autonomous ships. Do we always have to reinvent the wheel, or would you say that there is one common lesson learned that we could apply to finding a common approach to mitigating the risks in these different technologies which are so connected? But it seems that everything that is coming up is being discussed anew. So is there anything that we could take forward also from perhaps connected vehicles as cars that we think for other technologies such as drones and many more devices that are being connected?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. And certainly when talking about connected vehicles, I think we often reflect on the degree to which it's a microcosm of that much broader debate around the Internet of Things, because you're looking at perhaps connected vehicles are one of the most complex versions of that, but in there are aspects of it that you might also find in your refrigerator or your washing machine that has a sort of an element of connectivity to it. I guess one can speculate on whether the risks around a washing machine are quite equivalent to the risks around a vehicle on our roads. But I mean, I think that the response, I think, to your question is yes, of course, there are going to be some commonalities between these connectivity issues in relation to different devices, not just within the transport space, as I say, but also within, across the economy. And the UK certainly has horizontal regulation looking at cybersecurity, which sets a kind of basic minimum standard across the entire economy for these kind of connected devices. The approach that we've then taken is saying, well, effectively, we then add to or we potentially disapply those horizontal regulations and replace them with more detailed vertical regulation where that is appropriate for the particular product. So I think it's, yes, recognizing that there are going to be some commonalities and some lessons learned across the board, and probably some sort of basic minimum things which it is sensible to do, again, with the aim of securing security sort of by design into a product, and also having the right sort of provisions around that, and really instilling that approach and expecting that approach from manufacturers of whatever product, which is kind of recognizing that in introducing connectivity to a product, you're taking a certain amount of responsibility, and that comes with some obligations for how that is managed. And that's kind of set out in sort of the baseline legislation, but then understanding what the kind of specific vulnerabilities might be with respect to particular products, whether that's a road vehicle or a ship or a kettle. And then again, kind of going back to what I said earlier, being kind of proportionate about then, mitigating those risks in the right way. But as I say, definitely not reinventing wheels, but learning from other areas and then understanding how much of that can be employed.
So Phil and I have the common characteristic of being sectoral experts. So of course, talking about reinventing the wheel, we
regulation.
But joke aside, yes. I guess the larger question is about the vertical regulations like UN Regulation 155 versus the more horizontal regulations like the Cyber Resilience Act in Europe. And well, as sectoral experts, we like our vertical regulations because we tend to think that we are more adapted to regulate our own products. And of course, there are advantages to that. If you have a sectoral regulation for cybersecurity in road vehicles, you can have a risk analysis method that's specifically targeted at risks for road vehicles. So you obviously have some upsides. However, we are aware that we might be missing, of course, some of the big picture, some of the discussions that can happen at other fora, or some broader cybersecurity geopolitical goals that might not be reaching us in our very expert-led groups. So it's very good to take advantage of some of the horizontal exchanges that are taking place. And some of that can come top to bottom on our side. And this is why I think some self-actualization is necessary for what we are doing. And with UN Regulation 155, we could always try and do some stock taking of what's happening elsewhere. We could do a comparison with other regional or national acts. We could do comparisons with Cyber Resilience Act, see if we are missing anything, see if we should actualize. And perhaps there is also the possibility for the other way around. And we've seen instances where regulations that were sector specific were transferred a bit organically to other sectors. I'm thinking of, for instance, the regulation on safety glass that's usually for road vehicles, but has been used for other products that are not road vehicles. So sometimes when a regulation is good and it works for other sectors, things happen organically. So it's good on our side to look at what's happening elsewhere, but sometimes it's also good to let the world know what you're doing. And I hope that we've managed to do that today somehow.
Zooming out a little bit, I think cybersecurity in the future will have many not yet known forms and risks talking AI, talking quantum, and talking all that we still already cannot know. One thing is clear, it will grow ever more important each day. So I think we do good in having international cooperation, one strand, standard setting, horizontally, vertical, can be various forms. On the other hand, having agreed basic norms and principles. Our basic law serves us very well here in Germany for after World War II and until now. And this international cooperation should set the prerequisites for setting standards and norms and for basic regulation and basic rules. If we want those basic rules to be forward-looking and to have a longer period of duration of application, those norms, I wonder whether you would agree, could be or should be country agnostic and tech neutral. We started with those two basic principles, and until now it served us well. I don't see a better jumping on the topic. I don't see it right now.
Really love, yeah, that we keep on zooming out, which is good, and also that we have this baseline, I think, of norms, but baseline of certification, and I think that's really things are coming together among countries that they get a common perception. We saw today, as we're wrapping up, you will have a possibility to ask the panelists directly in a second if you have any questions, because we're unfortunately running out of time. So I'll just make a very quick recap of what we spoke today. I think we saw different kind of vocabulary. We saw vertical, horizontal regulation, which vary across ministries, but we really have this common sense of, I think it makes sense to look at country agnostic measures. But I think if we say, if we even look at the example of dependence, if we have a large dependence on certain suppliers or actors, then we can look at reducing that dependence. It doesn't depend on which country it is. We just can't be too dependent on one single country. So I think that's, again, that can be country agnostic, but it's really about looking at the dependence. And I think we don't have to only look at the specific things. We already started to look at that, zoom out a little bit. It's not just about a risk, let's say, in cars. It's not just about the risk in drones. We need to look at the added risk that we see across our technological supply chain. And so I think we really need to do a proper systemic risk analysis across Europe, and that in critical infrastructure, whether that's in energy, whether that's in cars, and if we see that the dependence in all these sectors is quite high, the risk gets even larger. So we really need to look at that compounded risk. I think that's what we lose out of sight slowly. We say, okay, actually in cars, the risk is manageable, in 5G maybe as well. But then if we look at those things together, the risk is quite high. We see that the common risk is quite high. Anyway, I'd like to wrap it up here, and thank you all for coming. Thank you to the sun for shining this afternoon, for making it nice and warm. We'll still be able to gather outside on the terrace. Thank you very much to the speakers for joining us, for bringing together also the 3 largest automotive markets in Europe. So anything they say has importance by definition, which is good that we brought you all here together. We'll have a short break now, so feel free to ask your questions, to gather, to mingle. And later on, for those who received an invitation, we'll also have a workshop to go even more in depth on those issues. Thank you, everyone. Hope to see you soon again. We'll keep the discussion going and drive safely.